The woman stood in the doorway holding his missing brother like her own child and whispered the words that would change everything. "Sir, this boy lives in my house." What Rick Salvatore discovered next would force the most feared mafia boss in Seattle to question everything he thought he knew about family, loyalty, and the woman brave enough to protect what mattered most. Tell us your city below, hit subscribe, and get ready for today's story. Let's start. But to understand how Seattle's most dangerous crime lord ended up begging a nurse for answers, we need to go back to where it all began. The rain hammered Seattle's streets like bullets against concrete when Rick Salvatore received the call that would haunt him for months. His half-brother Dylan, barely 4 years old, had vanished without a trace from their family compound. "Don Salvatore," Vincent's voice cracked through the encrypted phone. "The boy, he's gone. Security cameras show nothing. No signs of struggle. He just disappeared." Rick's hand tightened around the phone until his knuckles went white. Dylan wasn't just his half-brother. He was the only pure thing left in Rick's blood-soaked world. Their father had died 3 years ago, leaving Rick to protect the child born from his father's second marriage. "Lock down the city," Rick commanded from his penthouse office overlooking Elliott Bay. "Every street, every building, every shadow. I want my brother found." Within hours, the Salvatore organization mobilized like a military operation. Rick's most trusted men, Marco, Luca, Tony, spread throughout Seattle's underground networks. Missing person flyers appeared on every street corner, in every shop window, carried by soldiers who asked questions without expecting lies. But days turned into weeks, and weeks crawled into months. Despite Rick's empire controlling half the city's illegal activities, despite having eyes and ears in every neighborhood, Dylan remained a ghost. The boy had simply vanished as if he'd never existed. Rick barely slept. He walked Seattle's streets himself, something a Don never did, searching faces in crowds, following false leads that led nowhere. His usually immaculate appearance grew haggard. The empire that had taken him 15 years to build began showing cracks as his attention focused entirely on finding his missing brother. "Boss," Marco approached carefully one gray October morning, "the other families are starting to notice. Romano's people are testing our territory lines. They think we're weak. Let them come." Rick's voice carried the cold promise of violence. "My brother is more important than their ambitions." But privately, Rick wondered if Dylan was even alive. In their world, children disappeared for reasons that made hardened criminals wake up screaming. The thought of his innocent half-brother suffering because of Rick's enemies was slowly destroying him from the inside. Standing at his office window, watching Seattle's morning commute, Rick made a silent promise. He would find Dylan no matter how many cities he had to burn or how many lives he had to destroy. And when he discovered who had taken his brother, their death would become legend in the criminal underworld. What he didn't know was that 3 miles away, a gentle nurse named Amanda Martinez was reading bedtime stories to a scared little boy who called her Mama and had no memory of his real name. Amanda Martinez had discovered Dylan on a freezing February night 6 months ago, huddled behind the dumpster outside Sacred Heart Hospital, where she worked as a pediatric nurse. The child was bruised, terrified, and couldn't tell her his name. Trauma had stolen his words along with his memories. "It's okay, sweetheart," Amanda had whispered, wrapping her coat around his shivering form. "You're safe now." She should have called the police immediately, should have followed protocol and turned him over to Child Protective Services. But something about the boy's haunted eyes reminded her of her own childhood fears, and she couldn't bear the thought of him disappearing into the system. "Mama, is Dylan coming to breakfast?" 10-year-old Sophia asked, braiding her dark hair at their small kitchen table. "Of course, mi amor," Amanda smiled, flipping pancakes on their ancient stove. "He's probably still sleeping. It was a long night." Dylan had been having nightmares again, crying out for someone named Rico while thrashing in his sleep. Amanda suspected it might be a sibling or cousin, but the trauma counselor said pushing for memories too quickly could damage him further. "I love having a little brother," Sophia announced, pouring orange juice into 3 mismatched glasses. "Even if he can't remember where he came from." Amanda's heart clenched. Sophia had adapted to their expanded family with the resilience of children, treating Dylan like the brother she'd always wanted. But Amanda knew their situation was dangerous. Whoever Dylan really was, someone out there was probably looking for him. "Morning, beautiful," she said softly as Dylan appeared in the doorway, his brown hair sticking up at impossible angles. At 4 years old, he was small for his age, but his dark eyes held intelligence that sometimes seemed too mature. "Mama!" He ran to her, wrapping small arms around her legs. "I dreamed about the scary men again. There are no scary men here." "Baby." Amanda lifted him onto her hip. "Just Mama and Sophia and lots of love." She'd taken 6 months of unpaid leave from the hospital, claiming family emergency, and used her savings to care for Dylan while working night shifts at a private clinic. The financial strain was enormous, but watching him slowly learn to smile again made every sacrifice worthwhile. After breakfast, Amanda bundled both children into her aging Honda for their weekly grocery trip. Dylan held Sophia's hand in the back seat, chattering about the cartoon they'd watched, his vocabulary improving daily. "Mama, look!" Sophia pointed excitedly as they passed a bus stop. "It's the missing boy poster again." Amanda's blood turned to ice. A large photograph of Dylan's face stared back at her from the city's latest "Have You Seen This Child?" campaign. The name beneath read Dylan Salvatore, and the reward amount had increased to $1 million. Her hands shook as she drove past, trying to keep her expression neutral while her mind raced. Salvatore. She'd heard that name whispered in the hospital hallways, connected to the crime families that controlled parts of Seattle's underground. "Why do they keep putting up pictures of Dylan?" Sophia asked innocently. "Sometimes people make mistakes with photos, mi amor," Amanda managed. "It's probably another little boy who looks similar." But as she glanced in the rearview mirror at Dylan's innocent face, Amanda knew with terrible certainty that their quiet, safe world was about to shatter, and whoever was looking for him had the resources to search forever. Rick Salvatore stood before the bathroom mirror in his penthouse, adjusting his tie with practiced precision, despite the exhaustion that had become his constant companion. 7 months of searching had yielded nothing but dead ends and false hope. His reflection showed a man aged beyond his 38 years, dark circles beneath eyes that had once commanded respect through confidence alone. "Don Salvatore," Marco's voice carried through the intercom, "the weekly briefing is ready." "Coming." Rick straightened his shoulders. Even in his darkest moments, he couldn't show weakness. The families were watching, waiting for any sign that the great Rick Salvatore was cracking under pressure. The briefing room fell silent as he entered. 6 of his most trusted men sat around the mahogany table, each representing a different aspect of his organization. Missing person flyers covered every surface. Dylan's face stared back from dozens of angles, different ages, various artistic renderings of how he might look now. "Report," Rick commanded, taking his seat at the head of the table. "We've expanded the search to Portland and Vancouver," Luca said, consulting his notes. "Private investigators in both cities are showing Dylan's photo to every school, daycare, and pediatric facility. So far, nothing. The reward is generating too many false leads," Tony added. "Yesterday alone, we investigated 47 tips, all dead ends." Rick's jaw clenched. "What about the hospitals? Anyone treating a child matching his description?" "Medical privacy laws are blocking us," Marco explained carefully. "We can't access patient records without proof of relationship or legal authority." "Then we get creative." Rick's voice dropped to the dangerous tone his men knew to fear. "I don't care about privacy laws. My brother is somewhere in this city and I will find him." Vincent shifted uncomfortably. "Boss, there's something else. The Romano family made another move on our East Side territory yesterday. They're getting bolder." "Handle it." Rick dismissed the concern with a wave. "Whatever it takes." "With respect, Don Salvatore," Marco leaned forward, "the other families are starting to wonder if your personal situation is affecting your judgment. Some are questioning whether you're still capable of leading." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Rick's men had never seen him lose control, but months of frustration and grief were pushing him toward a breaking point that would terrify even his closest allies. "Question my judgment." Rick stood slowly, his voice deadly calm. "Tell me, Marco, which of you has ever lost a child?" None of them answered. "Dylan is 4 years old. He's scared, probably hungry, definitely confused about why his big brother hasn't come to save him yet." Rick's hands pressed against the table. "So, excuse me if protecting my family takes priority over territorial disputes with second-rate criminals." The silence stretched uncomfortably until Luca cleared his throat. "What are your orders, boss?" "Double the reward to 2 million. Put Dylan's photo on every digital billboard in the Pacific Northwest, and I want someone checking every pediatric facility in Seattle personally. No phone calls, no written requests. face-to-face meetings with people who might have seen him. As his men filed out to execute his orders, Rick remained alone with Dylan's photographs. Somewhere in this city, his brother was living a life Rick couldn't imagine. Every night, Rick wondered if Dylan remembered his real family, if he was being treated well, if he even knew his own name. He pulled out his phone and dialed the one number that always answered. "Any news, my son?" Father DeMarco's gentle voice carried decades of comforting the faithful. "Nothing, Father. It's like he vanished from the earth." Faith, Ricardo. Sometimes the answer we seek is closer than we realize. Rick closed his eyes, hoping the priest was right, unaware that at that very moment, 3 miles away, Amanda Martinez was helping Dylan practice writing his letters while secretly planning their escape from Seattle. The third time Sophia pointed out Dylan's missing person poster, Amanda knew they had to leave Seattle. She'd been living in a fool's paradise thinking they could hide in plain sight forever. But the reward had doubled. The posters were everywhere, and eventually someone would make the connection. "We're going to visit Aunt Carmen in Portland," she announced over dinner, trying to keep her voice cheerful. "Won't that be fun?" "Can Dylan come?" Sophia asked immediately. "Of course, mi amor. We're a family now." Dylan looked up from his spaghetti, sauce covering his chin. "Are the scary men in Portland too?" Amanda's heart broke a little more. Even with his memories gone, some part of Dylan understood they were running from danger. "No, baby. Portland is safe. We'll all be safe there." But as she began secretly packing their belongings that night, Amanda wondered if anywhere would ever truly be safe. The name Salvatore carried weight in cities throughout the Pacific Northwest. If Dylan really belonged to that family, running to Portland might only delay the inevitable. Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. "Amanda," her supervisor, Dr. Peterson's voice sounded tired. "I'm sorry to call so late, but we need you to come in tonight. Maria called in sick, and we have 3 critical patients in pediatric ICU." Amanda closed her eyes. She couldn't afford to refuse. She needed every dollar she could earn before they disappeared. "I'll be there in an hour." Finding a babysitter at midnight wasn't easy, but Mrs. Chen from downstairs agreed to watch both children for extra money. Amanda kissed Sophia and Dylan goodbye, promising to be back before breakfast. Sacred Heart Hospital was quieter at night, but the pediatric ICU never truly slept. Amanda threw herself into work, checking on tiny patients fighting battles that would challenge adults. It was nearly 4 a.m. when Dr. Peterson found her charting medications in the break room. "Amanda, we need to talk." She looked up, noting his serious expression. "Is everything okay?" "That's what I should be asking you." He sat across from her, hands folded. "You've been different these past months. Distracted, secretive. The staff is concerned." Amanda's pulse quickened. "I'm fine, just dealing with some personal issues." "Issues involving a child who looks remarkably similar to that missing boy whose photos are all over the city?" The color drained from Amanda's face. Dr. Peterson knew. Somehow he'd made the connection between Dylan and the missing Salvatore child. "I don't know what you mean," she said carefully. "I've been practicing pediatric medicine for 25 years, Dr. Peterson said gently. "I know fear when I see it, and I know love. Whatever situation you're in, Amanda, you don't have to handle it alone." Tears threatened to spill from her eyes. "It's complicated. The best things usually are." He reached across the table and patted her hand. "I'm not going to report anything, if that's what you're worried about. But I want you to know that if you need help, legal help, financial help, whatever, you have friends here." After her shift ended, Amanda sat in her car in the hospital parking lot, crying quietly as Seattle's morning commute began around her. Dr. Peterson's kindness had reminded her how isolated she'd become, how much of her old life she'd sacrificed to protect Dylan. But as she thought about Dylan's sleepy smile when she'd left him with Mrs. Chen, Amanda knew she'd make the same choice again. Some things were worth any sacrifice. She was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't notice the black sedan that had been following her for the past 3 days, or the man inside photographing her license plate as she drove home to the 2 children who had become her world. Rick had been walking Seattle's International District for 2 hours when he saw the little girl. She was maybe 10 years old, holding an older woman's hand as they waited at a crosswalk. There was something familiar about her profile, the way she moved, that made him look twice. Then she pointed directly at Dylan's missing person poster, taped to a nearby bus shelter. "Abuela, that's the boy from the pictures," the girl said in clear English tinged with a slight accent. "The one who lives with us." Rick's world stopped. The traffic lights, the pedestrian chatter, the rumble of city buses. Everything faded into background noise as the girl's words repeated in his mind. The one who lives with us. He followed them at a distance, his heart pounding harder than it had during his first kill 15 years ago. The older woman, apparently the grandmother, hurried the girl along, glancing nervously over her shoulder, as if sensing they were being watched. They turned onto Pike Street, then into a small bodega. Rick positioned himself across the street, pretending to check his phone while actually memorizing every detail. The girl had dark hair in braids, worn jeans, a purple backpack with cartoon characters. She looked healthy, well cared for, loved. When they emerged 20 minutes later, Rick was ready. He'd called Marco for backup and positioned his men throughout the neighborhood, but as they walked toward a modest apartment building 6 blocks away, Rick realized he wasn't prepared for what came next. A woman emerged from the building's entrance, and Rick's breath caught in his throat. She was beautiful in an understated way, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, minimal makeup, wearing scrubs that suggested she worked in healthcare. But it wasn't her appearance that stopped him cold. It was the small boy holding her hand. Dylan, older than in the photos, his hair slightly longer, but unmistakably his missing brother. The child Rick had spent 7 months moving heaven and earth to find was walking down a Seattle sidewalk like any normal 4-year-old, chattering excitedly to the woman who apparently raised him as her own son. "Rico!" Dylan suddenly exclaimed, tugging on the woman's hand. "Rico, Rico!" Rick's vision blurred. Rico, Dylan's baby nickname for him, the one only their father had used. Somehow, despite whatever trauma had stolen his memories, Dylan remembered. The woman, Amanda, he would later learn, knelt to Dylan's level, her voice too distant for Rick to hear clearly. But her body language spoke volumes. Protective, gentle, devoted. This woman loved his brother, had been caring for him, probably sacrificing for him, while Rick had been tearing the city apart, searching. Rick pulled out his phone with shaking hands. "Marco, I found him. I found Dylan. Thank God. Where? Should we move in?" Rick watched Amanda lift Dylan to her hip, listened to his brother's happy laughter as they walked toward their building. 7 months of agony, of sleepless nights and desperate prayers, were about to end. But as he prepared to reclaim his family, Rick realized he was about to destroy another one. The woman clearly adored Dylan. The little girl treated him like a brother. They'd built a life together, created bonds that would shatter when the truth came out. For the first time in his criminal career, Rick Salvatore found himself facing a problem that couldn't be solved with money, threats, or violence. How do you take back what was stolen without becoming the monster in someone else's story? As Amanda and both children disappeared into their apartment building, Rick remained frozen on the sidewalk, finally understanding that finding his brother was only the beginning of his real challenge. Rick stood outside Amanda's apartment building for 3 hours, watching the windows, planning his approach. His men waited in cars positioned throughout the block, but he'd given strict orders. No aggression unless absolutely necessary. This required diplomacy, not the methods that had built his empire. When Amanda finally emerged alone, probably heading to work based on her scrubs, Rick intercepted her on the sidewalk. "Miss Martinez," he said quietly, stepping from the shadows near the building entrance. Amanda froze, her nurse's instincts immediately recognizing danger despite his calm demeanor. This man was expensive, from his perfectly tailored coat to his confident posture, but expensive in a way that meant trouble. "I don't know you," she said carefully, keys ready in her hand as a weapon. "But you know my brother." Rick's voice carried no threat, only exhaustion. "Dylan Salvatore, the boy you've been protecting." The color drained from Amanda's face. She'd known this moment would come, but facing it felt like stepping off a cliff. "I don't understand what you mean." "Please." Rick held up both hands, showing he wasn't armed. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. I just want to talk about the child who's been missing from our family for 7 months. Amanda's mind raced. Run back inside, scream for help, but something in his eyes, grief, desperation, love, made her hesitate. "You're Rick Salvatore." "I am, and you're the woman who saved my brother's life." Tears threatened to spill from her eyes. "He was hurt when I found him, scared. He couldn't even remember his name." "I know." Rick's voice broke slightly. "Someone took him from our home, did things to him that stole his memories. When I find who did that..." He stopped, visibly controlling himself. "But right now, All I care about is that he's alive, because of you." Amanda studied his face, seeing genuine emotion beneath the dangerous exterior. "He calls me Mama." The words hit Rick like a physical blow. His baby brother, who had called him Rico since learning to talk, now called another woman Mama. Is he happy?" "Yes." Amanda's answer was immediate. "He's wonderful, smart, funny, gentle. He loves stories and building blocks and singing silly songs." Rick closed his eyes, picturing the brother he remembered. He always loved music, used to dance whenever our housekeeper played the radio. For a moment, they stood in shared understanding of Dylan's joy. Then reality crashed back. "You want to take him away," Amanda said. "He's my family. He's mine too." Her voice strengthened with maternal fierce protection. "I've been his mother for 7 months. I've held him through nightmares, taught him to ride a bike, celebrated every small victory as he healed from whatever trauma he suffered." Rick saw the truth in her eyes. This woman loved Dylan as completely as he did. "I'm not a monster, Amanda, despite what you might have heard about my name. You're a crime boss. I'm a big brother who's been searching for the most important person in my world." Rick stepped closer, his voice intense but not threatening. "Every day for 7 months I've wondered if he was dead, if someone was hurting him, if he remembered me at all." Amanda's professional instincts warred with her protective ones. This man was clearly dangerous, but his grief felt genuine. "What do you want?" "To see him. To know he's truly safe. To figure out how we move forward without destroying the life you've built for him. And if I refuse?" Rick considered lying, making threats, using the power that had made him feared throughout the criminal underworld. Instead, he chose truth. "Then I'll respect that decision. Because the last thing Dylan needs is more trauma." Amanda stared at him, searching for deception and finding only raw honesty. Against every rational thought, she believed him. "One meeting, supervised, and if he gets scared or uncomfortable, you leave immediately." Rick nodded, not trusting his voice. After 7 months of hell, he was about to see his brother again. As they walked toward her building, neither noticed the photographer hidden across the street, capturing images that would soon reach very dangerous people who had their own plans for the missing Salvatore heir. "Dylan, sweetheart, there's someone who wants to meet you," Amanda said gently, kneeling beside the couch where Dylan was building a tower with blocks. Sophia sat nearby, suspicious and protective. "Is it the scary men from my dreams?" Dylan asked, his small hands pausing. "No, baby, this is someone who knew you before you came to live with us. Someone who's been very worried about you." Rick entered the modest living room, and Amanda watched his face transform as he saw Dylan up close for the first time in 7 months. The powerful crime boss she'd met on the street disappeared, replaced by a man fighting tears. "Hello, Dylan," Rick said softly, crouching to the child's level but maintaining distance. "My name is Rick. Rico." Dylan tilted his head, studying Rick's face with the intense concentration of childhood. Something flickered in his eyes. Not memory exactly, but recognition on a level deeper than conscious thought. "Rico," Dylan repeated carefully. "Like the song Mama sings." Amanda's heart clenched. She'd been singing Rico Suave absent-mindedly while cooking, never realizing the name's significance. "Can you sing it?" Rick asked, his voice barely steady. Dylan launched into an off-key but enthusiastic rendition, making Rick smile for the first time in months. When the song ended, Dylan suddenly abandoned his blocks and walked directly to Rick. "You smell like Daddy," he announced matter-of-factly. Rick's breath caught. "Your daddy wore the same cologne I do. It's called Armani Code. Daddy had pretty cars and gave me piggyback rides." "He did. And you loved riding on his shoulders because you said it made you as tall as the buildings." Dylan's face lit up with something approaching memory. "Tall like King Kong?" "Exactly like King Kong." Rick glanced at Amanda, who was watching the interaction with amazed horror. "You always wanted to be tall enough to protect everyone you loved." For 20 minutes, Rick and Dylan talked about colors, toys, and favorite foods. Dylan showed Rick his drawing of their family, Amanda, Sophia, and a small figure labeled Me surrounded by hearts. Rick studied the picture with the reverence most people reserved for priceless art. "He's happy here," Rick said quietly to Amanda, while Dylan played. "You've given him something I never could, a normal childhood. He needs stability, routine, safety, things my world can't provide." Rick's admission cost him everything, but he also needs to know who he really is, where he comes from. Their conversation was interrupted by Sophia, who had been increasingly agitated. "Are you going to take Dylan away?" she demanded, stepping protectively in front of her adoptive brother. Rick looked at the fierce 10-year-old defending her family. "That's not my decision to make alone." "Good," Sophia declared, "because Dylan belongs with us." The moment was shattered by Amanda's phone ringing. Unknown number, which usually meant work emergency. "Hello?" she answered. "Miss Martinez?" The voice was cold, professional. "This is Detective Morrison, Seattle PD. We need to discuss the child in your custody. We'll be there in 10 minutes. Amanda's blood turned to ice. "What child? Don't play games. We know about Dylan Salvatore. Someone reported that you're harboring a kidnapped minor." The line went dead. Amanda looked at Rick, who had heard enough to understand. "They're coming," she whispered. Rick's expression hardened into something Amanda recognized from news reports, the face of a man who controlled an empire through calculated violence. "Not if we leave first. I can't run. I have a life here. A job, responsibilities. And I have enemies who would use Dylan to destroy me. If the police take him into custody, he becomes a target." Rick's voice carried absolute certainty. "Someone called this in, Amanda. Someone who wants Dylan found for reasons that have nothing to do with his safety." Dylan looked up from his blocks, sensing the tension. "Mama, are the scary men coming?" Amanda made a choice that would change all their lives. "Yes, baby. But Rico is going to help us stay safe." As sirens wailed in the distance, Rick Salvatore found himself responsible for protecting not just his brother, but the woman and child who had become Dylan's family. The most dangerous man in Seattle was about to discover that love makes criminals of everyone. The safe house was nothing like Amanda expected. Instead of a grimy hideout, Rick had brought them to a modest cabin 40 minutes outside Seattle, furnished comfortably and stocked with everything 2 children might need. "How did you know to have all this?" Amanda asked, watching Dylan and Sophia explore their temporary refuge, while Rick checked security systems. "I've been planning for Dylan's return for months," Rick admitted. "I wanted somewhere safe, somewhere that felt like a home instead of a fortress. The past 6 hours had been a whirlwind." Rick's men had spirited them out of Amanda's building through the service entrance, while police pounded on the front door. They'd retrieved essentials, clothes, toys, Sophia's homework, before disappearing into the network of safe routes Rick's organization used for emergencies. "Why are you helping us?" Amanda asked. "Oh, you could have just taken Dylan." Rick watched his brother showing Sophia how their father had taught him to skip stones across the cabin's small pond, because taking him would break him, and breaking him would destroy me. The vulnerability in his voice surprised her. This wasn't the feared crime boss Seattle whispered about. This was a man torn between duty and love. "Tell me about him," Amanda said softly. "Before." Rick's face softened. "Dylan was the light in our house. Dad was complicated, powerful, ruthless when necessary, but Dylan made him laugh like nothing else could. When Dad died 3 years ago, Dylan was the only thing that kept me from burning the whole world down. He was so scared when I found him." "What happened?" "Rivals trying to hurt me through family. They took him to send a message, but something went wrong. Maybe they got cold feet about hurting a child. Maybe their plan fell apart. All I know is Dylan escaped, or was abandoned, and he's been blocking out everything from before." Amanda watched Dylan's joyful laughter as he played, trying to imagine him terrified and alone. "He still has nightmares sometimes, calls out for Rico. He was calling for me." Rick's voice broke. "All these months, he's been calling for me, and I couldn't find him. But I could. I could protect him when you couldn't." The accusation hung between them, but instead of anger, Rick showed only gratitude. "You saved him, Amanda. When I failed, you succeeded. Do you think I could ever be anything but thankful for that?" Their eyes met across the cabin's kitchen, and Amanda felt something shift between them. This dangerous man had just admitted his greatest failure and given her credit for his most important victory. The vulnerability was intoxicating. "Mama, Rico!" Dylan called from outside. "Come see the fish!" They found both children crouched by the pond's edge, watching minnows dart through the shallow water. "Rico, did you know fish can hold their breath underwater?" Dylan asked seriously. "I did know that," Rick replied with equal seriousness. "Did you know they sleep with their eyes open?" "Really?" "Really, just like how some people sleep with their hearts open." Amanda caught the look Rick gave her as he said it, and her pulse quickened. This was dangerous territory, not just because of who Rick was, but because of what she was beginning to feel for him. That night, after Sophia and Dylan fell asleep in the cabin's loft, Amanda and Rick sat by the fireplace, sharing coffee and an intimacy born of shared crisis. "What happens tomorrow?" Amanda asked. "I don't know. That's not something I say often." "Because crime bosses always have plans," Rick smiled ruefully. "Because Salvatore men always protect what matters, but I've never had to protect two families at once." "Is that what we are? Family?" "Dylan thinks so. He drew you another picture today. All four of us under the same sun." Amanda felt tears threatening. "This is insane, Rick. I'm a pediatric nurse who drives a Honda and budgets groceries. Yours? I'm a man who's fallen in love with the woman who saved his brother." The words hung in the air like a confession to murder. Amanda stared at him, seeing truth in his eyes that terrified her. "You don't love me," she whispered. "You love what I represent, safety for Dylan." Rick moved closer. Rick moved, his voice intense but gentle. "I love how you sing while cooking breakfast. I love watching you braid Sophia's hair with the patience of a saint. I love that you chose Dylan over your own safety, without hesitation." He cupped her face with hands that had ended lives and were now impossibly tender. "I love you, Amanda Martinez, and it's the most inconvenient truth of my dangerous life." Before she could respond, his phone buzzed with a message that made his face go deadly pale. "What is it?" "Someone knows where we are, and they're not coming to talk." The attack came at 3 a.m. with military precision. Amanda woke to Rick's hand over her mouth and his whispered urgent instructions. "Stay quiet, get the children, we have 30 seconds." Through the cabin windows, she could see dark figures moving through the trees, surrounding them with professional coordination. This wasn't random violence. It was a calculated operation by people who understood how Rick's world worked. "Rico, what's happening?" Dylan appeared at the top of the loft stairs, Sophia beside him, both children rubbing sleepy eyes. "Adventure game," Rick said calmly, though Amanda could see the cold fury building in his expression. "We're going to play hide-and-seek in the special basement." The cabin's panic room was accessed through a hidden door beneath the kitchen table. Rick had built it specifically for situations like this: reinforced walls, independent air supply, communications equipment, and enough supplies for several days. "Amanda, take them down. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except me." "What about you?" Rick checked his weapon, his transformation into the feared Don Salvatore complete. "I'm going to remind some people why my family is off limits. Rick, no, there are too many of them." He kissed her forehead, the gesture tender against the backdrop of approaching violence. "Trust me, and if something goes wrong, there's a phone down there with one program number. Marco will get you all somewhere safe." The sound of breaking glass ended their conversation. Rick sealed them in the panic room just as gunfire erupted above their heads. "Mama, I'm scared," Dylan whispered, clinging to Amanda in the underground shelter. "Rico is protecting us, baby, just like always." But as the sounds of combat raged overhead, gunshots, shouting, something heavy hitting the floor, Amanda wondered if Rick's love for them had just gotten him killed. Then sudden silence fell like a suffocating blanket. Sophia grabbed Amanda's hand. "Is it over?" Amanda didn't know. The panic room's monitors showed static. The cabin's security cameras had been destroyed. They could be sitting beneath a house full of enemies, or Rick could be bleeding out on the kitchen floor. 20 minutes passed, then an hour. Dylan fell asleep against Amanda's shoulder, exhausted by fear. Sophia dozed fitfully, jumping at every small sound. When the hidden door finally opened, Amanda's heart nearly stopped. "It's me," Rick's voice called down. "It's safe." He looked like he'd walked through hell, torn clothes, blood on his hands, a cut across his cheek, but he was alive. Amanda handed Dylan to Sophia and threw herself into his arms. "I thought they killed you." "Not today." Rick held her tight. "But we have bigger problems." "What do you mean?" "The men who attacked us weren't random enemies. They knew exactly where we were, how the cabin was laid out, what security measures I'd installed." Rick's expression was grimmer than Amanda had ever seen it. "Someone in my organization betrayed us." The implications hit Amanda like a physical blow. "Someone you trusted. Someone who's been feeding information to my enemies for months. Someone who knew about Dylan's disappearance, about my search, about my feelings for you." Amanda felt ice in her veins. "How do you know?" Rick showed her a phone recovered from one of the attackers. The last message received read, "Target confirmed at safe house with woman and children. Boss wants all four alive for leverage." "Boss?" "Vincent Romano. The man who's been trying to take over my territory for 2 years. The man who—" Rick's voice trailed off as understanding dawned in his eyes. The man who probably arranged Dylan's kidnapping in the first place. Amanda stared at him. You think Romano took Dylan originally? I think Romano has been playing a much longer game than I realized. Take Dylan, let me tear the city apart looking for him. Watch my organization weaken from the inside while I'm distracted. Rick's face hardened into something terrifying. And when Dylan finally surfaced, Romano would be ready to take us all. But Dylan escaped or was released or Romano's original plan failed. And he's been waiting for another opportunity. Rick pulled out his phone. Well, he's about to get more opportunity than he bargained for. As Rick made calls to mobilize his remaining loyal men, Amanda realized their quiet refuge was over. The war for Dylan and for their impossible family was just beginning. And somewhere in Seattle, Vincent Romano was discovering that threatening Rick Salvatore's family was the last mistake he'd ever make. The final confrontation took place in the warehouse district where Rick's empire had been born 20 years earlier. Dawn was breaking over Elliott Bay as Rick Salvatore prepared to end the war that had stolen his brother and threatened his future. You don't have to be here, Rick told Amanda for the 10th time as his men took positions throughout the abandoned building. Yes, I do. Amanda checked on Dylan and Sophia, both sleeping peacefully in the secured office where Marco stood guard. This started because someone hurt my son. I need to see it finished. Rick's expression softened at her calling Dylan my son, but hardened again as car engines approached outside. Vincent Romano was coming just as Rick's message had promised he would. Don Salvatore. Romano entered with 6 men, his confidence suggesting he believed he held all the advantages. I hear you have something that belongs to my organization. The only thing that belongs to you is a grave, Rick replied calmly. But we'll get to that. First, I want to hear you explain why you took my brother. Romano smiled coldly. Because you were weak, emotional. The other families were starting to question whether Rick Salvatore had what it takes to lead. So you kidnapped a 4-year-old child. I took leverage. Unfortunately, my men were overzealous. The boy escaped before we could use him properly. Amanda felt sick hearing Dylan reduced to leverage and use. Beside her, Rick's control was slipping toward something volcanic. But fate has a sense of irony, Romano continued. Here you are again, weak and emotional over the same child and his new family. Some people never learn. You're right, Rick said quietly. Some people never learn. The violence, when it came, was swift and decisive. Rick's men had been positioned for 30 minutes, while Romano's people walked into a carefully prepared trap. Within 60 seconds, Vincent Romano found himself alone and surrounded. His backup either fled or eliminated. You always underestimated one thing about me, Vincent, Rick said, approaching the man who had destroyed 7 months of his life. You thought emotion made me weak, but there's nothing more dangerous than a man protecting his family. You can't kill me here. Too many witnesses, too many connections to the legitimate world. Rick smiled, and Amanda felt a chill at the expression. Who said anything about killing you? Instead, Rick pulled out a phone and dialed a number. Detective Morrison? This is Rick Salvatore. I have information about the kidnapping of Dylan Salvatore, and I'm prepared to make a full confession in exchange for immunity and protection for my family. Romano's face went white. You can't be serious. Vincent Romano, sitting right here, just confessed to orchestrating my brother's kidnapping. I have recordings, witnesses, and enough evidence to put him away for 3 lifetimes. Rick's voice carried the satisfaction of perfect revenge. Enjoy federal prison, Vincent. I hear child kidnappers have a very difficult time there. As police sirens approached, Rick turned to Amanda. It's over. Dylan is safe, you're safe, and Romano will never threaten anyone again. What about your empire, your organization? Marco can handle that now. I'm done with this life, Amanda. Done with violence and territory and wars. Rick cupped her face gently. I want to build something new, something clean. With you and Dylan and Sophia, if you'll have me. Amanda looked at this impossible man who had given up everything for love. Are you proposing? I'm proposing we figure it out together. All of us as a family. Dylan appeared in the office doorway, rubbing sleepy eyes. Rico, Mama, why are there police cars? Rick knelt to his brother's level. Because the scary men from your dreams can't hurt you anymore, little brother. We're all safe now. Dylan smiled and launched himself into Rick's arms. Does this mean you're coming home with us? Rick looked at Amanda over Dylan's head, hope and love shining in his eyes. If Mama says yes, then yes. I'm coming home. Amanda thought about her modest apartment, her Honda, her careful budget. Then she thought about this beautiful, dangerous, impossible man who had chosen love over power, family over empire. "Welcome home, Rick Salvatore," she whispered. 6 months later, Seattle's newspapers would report that the feared crime boss had retired to pursue legitimate business interests. What they didn't report was that he spent his days teaching Dylan to ride a bike, helping Sophia with homework, and falling deeper in love with the nurse who had saved them all. Sometimes the most dangerous men make the most devoted family men, and sometimes love really can conquer everything, even the past that made it seem impossible.